Let's come back to Nigeria, where the biggest story was released 3 hours ago. Nigeria Statistics Office released a sobering report of the country's unemployment and underemployment in the fourth quarter of 2020. There's nothing new in the report, just maybe, because many Nigerians can tell simply by looking out of their windows or watching television and other media that jobs are disappearing fast, just like the ozone layer, and the country feeling the harsh realities of idle hands already employed by the proverbial devil. Let's get started with some of the details. Joining me to put some context, insight, and perspectives into Nigeria's latest labor force figures. Well, let's share this conversation with the Professor Franklin Ngwu, who is a director, associate professor, and of course, director at the Center for Sustainability of the Lagos Business School. He's one of our analysts this evening, joining us for this conversation. Let's start with you, Professor Franklin. It's good to have you. Professor, good evening. Welcome to the show.
Good evening, Boston, and thanks for having me.
Thank you. It's good to have you here. Let's just get started very quickly. Give me your first word on this latest labor force report.
Of course, as you said, it's not surprising. The only thing that it has gone up, which is expected, and now that we have a combined unemployment and underemployment at about 40%, it means that we have to redouble our efforts. We have to rethink so many things that we are doing. We also have to look at job creation from a more strategic and a serious perspective.
My introduction, which you reference, is that Nigerians can simply tell that we have unemployment on our hands. Could this fourth quarter report be used as a mirror or as a guide for the whole of last year? This was just fourth quarter 2020.
I mean, even at the second quarter, it just moved up to 33%. So even this new result it's not significantly different from what we've been having, even as of 2019. So as long as the economy is not growing, population is growing, and of course that means that the gap will be there, and that means that the absorbing capacity of the economy with regards to those that are graduating or those that are willing to work in terms of the total labor force, it means that it will continue to increase. So what it means that even with this challenge that we've had in 2020, coronavirus, we need to also sit back and say, even without coronavirus, we have a serious problem, and we need to start tackling it in a more strategic, collective, and holistic way.
How should this labor force report be interpreted?
Could you say it again, please?
Yeah, how should this report be interpreted by the common man in the streets? Let me put it that way.
What it means that there are more people willing to work, capable to work, but are unable to get a job. It also means that there are some people who are working, but they are grossly underutilized, underpaid, and that means that that's what we call underemployment. And when you combine the unemployment, those that are just looking for jobs from the total labor force, that are not able to get a job, and those that are working but are not properly in the job that are supposed to. And when you combine two of them, it now clearly tells you that there are more people on the streets who are desperate to get a job. Some of them that are working, about 20% of them are saying, no, this is not what we are supposed to do. We can even do a lot better than this.
Okay, so this is just a tweet because everybody is on this report right now. You know, this came in about 3 hours ago, just around closing time, but folks are still already on social media. This is from FDC, and I'm just going to read this very quickly. It said, the widely expected fourth quarter 2020 unemployment data was released this afternoon, showing an increase of 6.2% to 33.4%. This makes Nigeria the country with the third highest rate of unemployment in the world after Bosnia and Herzegovina, which has 33.69% and the second highest unemployment in Africa. So Nigeria has the third highest unemployment figure in the world right now after Bosnia and Herzegovina. And I'm sure we all know the history of the sordid history of Bosnia and Herzegovina.
Of course, and when you even add it to our population and what the implications of this level of unemployment is, you now understand the pervasive insecurity that we have. You now understand the pervasive poverty that we have. You now understand the other crisis that we have in Nigeria. And what it means, as I said earlier before, that it also means that some of the strategies that are being used at the moment, that we need to rethink some of them. So some of the interventions from the federal government, which good, commendable, but it means that they are not enough. But it also means that other levels of government, the state government, the local government, there's need for more collaboration between the government and the private sector to clearly say, how do we create more jobs? And there are so many opportunities, there are so many options for us to use to create jobs. Okay. And it also means that the Federal Ministry of Labor and Productivity, we need to rethink what they are doing in terms of saying, how do we make sure that they are up to task in terms of helping Nigerians to create jobs at a very, very fast rate.
Professor Ngwu, we'll get to that. If really the Ministry of Labor and Employment, or Labor and Unemployment, whatever it is, can actually provide jobs for 200 million people, that looks like that ministry will sink even with the level of unemployment and underemployment that we have on our hands. But let me just give us a second very quickly, Professor Ngwu, let me bring in onto the conversation Johnson Chukwu, who is a policy analyst and a CEO at Cowry Asset Management, is joining us via Skype. Thank you very much, Mr. Chukwu. It's good to have you on the show.
Thank you, Bose, for having me.
I'm just going to tag you very quickly to the last statement and the point I was raising with Professor Ngwu here. The folks at FDC Limited says Nigeria is now the country with the third highest rate of unemployment in the world after Bosnia and Herzegovina, with the figure today for Nigeria 33.4 at the end of December last year, and Bosnia and Herzegovina has 33.69%. We're now the second in Africa behind South Africa. How does that sound to you? Give me your first word.
Well, let me put it this way. Beyond the fact that we are second to South Africa in terms of unemployment, remember that South Africa has social safety net. We don't have social safety net. So if we further unpack the Nigerian unemployment figure at the end of fourth quarter 2020, you are going to see some disconcerting details. And let me tell you, Bose, total economically active population of the country at the end of that last quarter was 122 million, an increase of 4.3% from the 116 million it was in the second quarter of last year. But interestingly, the most frightening aspect of it is that the labor force actually declined by 13%, from 80 million to 67.7 million. So why was that drastic decline in the labor force when the economic active population has actually increased to 122 million? And my greatest fear is that a lot of Nigerians are no longer actively looking for jobs, and they have gone into crime. They've gone into some sorts of social malfeasance. And that's why you're seeing a huge incidence of kidnapping, all forms of haste, and a lot of people joining Boko Haram and all these fringe groups because they are no longer actively looking for them. They have lost confidence in the economy. They have become despondent. They are no longer active in the labor force. And that's why you saw a huge shrinkage in the labor force from 80 million to 67.7 million when the economically active population had actually increased from 116 million to 122 million. That for me was one of the most frightening aspects of the report we saw, because the fact that you have a 33% unemployment on a smaller base, on a base of 67.7 million, when you had 27.1% unemployment when the labor force was 80 million. So that takes you a lot more. What's happening to the economically active population of the country? Why are they no longer looking for jobs? It's not that we are saying that you have a higher level of employment, because when you look at the number of those who are employed, is 46 million. So you are not seeing that these guys have gone into private enterprise or they have become employers of labor. Rather, they are no longer looking for jobs. So where are they looking for jobs? Where exactly are they today? That should be a question that should agitate the mind of the government.
Okay. When we come back after the break, Johnson Chukwu and Professor Franklin Ngwu will look at these numbers a little bit further. For example, the unemployment figure in urban areas seems to be much lower than that in the rural areas. So does that account for the level of crime that Johnson Chukwu was talking about in the fringes outside of the cities, urban centers in Nigeria? We'll talk more about this when we come back. Stand by, everyone. Welcome back. And not many Nigerians are surprised at the latest poor labor force report released some 3 hours ago by the Statistics Office. Nigeria's unemployment figures have gotten worse over the past 6 years of the Buhari's administration. According to statistics, as at second quarter of 2015, when the current government came in, some 67.9 million Nigerians are employed. As at the fourth quarter of last year, the total number of fully employed Nigerians have sunk to 30.6 million. In other words, unemployment in Nigeria was around 10% in 2015, but stands at 33% as at December last year. Let's get the conversation going with my guests, Professor Franklin Ngwu of the Lagos Business School and Johnson Chukwu, the CEO at Cowry Asset Management. Gentlemen, thank you very much for sticking with us. Let's get on to this very sobering data about where we were and where we're going. But first, unemployment, urban figure, 8.286 million Nigerians. In the rural areas, nearly 15 million. Professor Ngwu, how does this make you feel about heading home at the end of the year to the village to say it's a happy holiday period?
Even if you don't go home, the text messages you receive, the calls you receive, are clearly indicative of the level of unemployment, poverty, and hardship that we have in our villages. And that is why also the crime rate in our villages is also increasing. And that is also why you find out that many people, most young men, they are migrating to the urban centers because the villages are becoming very, very difficult to stay. They are becoming very, very challenging, and it's quite a challenging period for Nigerians actually. And of course, when you now come to the urban centers, some of them are not working, some of them are working, but they are highly, highly underemployed in terms of their utilization, in terms of what they are doing. So some of them are graduates and they are driving taxis. Some of them graduate and are doing security jobs. It clearly tells you the challenges that we have in our country.
In terms of what these numbers tell, Johnson, Chukwu, let me just throw this to you. Sobering statistics about Nigeria's labor market over the past few years. What were the indicators of how we got into this very low level, by the way?
I think one of the things we have to recognize that we have seen consistent decline in our economic output. We have seen consistent decline in the GDP. We've seen the economy since 2016, when it went into recession and contracted by 1.58%. We've seen an economy that has grown slower than the population growth rate. And of course, what that means is that as more and more people come into the labor force, there are no opportunities being created in the economic environment to take them out of the labor market. So you see, as population is increasing and more people graduate from school, because the two factors that lead to high level of unemployment, the high level of unemployment is that one, you either have more people coming into the labor force and they are not being absorbed by the labor market, or you have people who are already working, they've lost their jobs. So two of them are impacting on our economy. We've seen a shrinkage in some sectors of the economy over the past 4 or 5 years. We've also seen an increase in the number of people coming to the labor market without being able to get jobs. And that's why you've seen consistent increase in the level of unemployment in the country. So until we begin to create jobs at a rate that's faster than the rate at which people are coming into the labor market, you are going to see this trend continue. And for us to achieve that, we must grow this economy at a rate that is faster, at the minimum, faster than the population growth rate, with a GDP growth rate that has not crossed that has averaged less than 2% in the past 5 years, and a population growth rate above 3%. You can imagine the impact, and that trend is continuing, and that's manifest in several areas. You are seeing higher level of poverty. You are seeing higher level of crime, which is a social offshoot of high level of unemployment. So we need to address the rate of economic growth. We need to create opportunities within the economy that the private sector can create employment. The up method that we're adopting of, say, the government can create 771 jobs in the local governments, with that will lead to what we may call underemployment, because those people who will be given jobs will not have anything to do. The key solution is to create a stimulating economic environment that will encourage private sector to create jobs. Until we focus on private sector job creation, we're going to continue with high level of unemployment because the rate of economic activity is actually not as fast as the population of those who are coming into the labor market.
So what measures, Professor Ngwu, let me ask you this, what measures do you think the administration we could have taken over the last 6 years?
There are so many measures that they could have taken. In terms of the policies that have been used to create jobs, in terms of policies that have been used to support the economic activities, as Mr. Chukwu just mentioned, in terms of, so even if we break it down to fiscal policies, monetary policies, and supply side policies, these are three key policy areas that the government could have used to address some of these issues. And of course, if you look at what happened...
addressed, Professor Ngwu, I'm going to respectfully cut in there. We've tried a few things. End power. There have been a whole lot of trader money, what have you. So, haven't we tried?
No, we have not tried. We have not tried boson. So if you look at, I mean, those interventions are good, but are very, very insignificant to the level of unemployment, to the level of poverty, to the level of challenge that we have in Nigeria. So those are more or less drops in ocean. So we need to do something big, we need to do something more strategic, we need to do something more ambitious, and it has to come from federal, state, local, in collaboration with the private sector. So a situation where you have only a few economic centers in Nigeria, Lagos, Port Harcourt, a bit of Kano, and that's it. Every other state in Nigeria is more or less a civil service state. It cannot work. And as I earlier mentioned, as long as the population growth is higher than the economic growth, there will be crisis, there will be problems. And as we also mentioned, more people are graduating on daily basis and willing to work, but they cannot find jobs. So interventions like Empower, this one, that one, they are good, but are very, very insignificant to the challenge that we have.
But Prof, I'm going to ask you this very quickly, and Johnson Chukwu touched on it a bit earlier. Do you think Nigerians are becoming, quote unquote, and with respect to everyone, a bit hopeless and despondent about getting jobs?
Not only about getting jobs, but about so many things. If you look at the figures from many companies, many people are leaving the country and going to other parts of the world, particularly Canada, UK, US, Australia, and other countries of the world. What does that tell you? And when we look at some of the companies, we are talking about people who are even doing meaningful jobs, who are even senior managers in different organizations. It means that even beyond job creation, which is very vital and which is very important, there are also a level of despondency and also a level of helplessness in other aspects of life. So in a situation where, like for example, the level of insecurity. So in terms of people not looking for jobs, because they've tried, some of them have tried for 5 years, 4 years, 6 years, and they cannot get a job. So that increases the level of despondency and hopelessness that we have in the country. And even when you drive around in different cities in Nigeria, you can feel it, you can see it. The anger, the level of hopelessness, you can actually see it on a daily basis. So it's not something that is not theoretical, it's something that can be perceived and seen.
A quick one, Johnson, let me ask you this. When we add the total unemployment with underemployment, the figure that we get is 56.1%. How scary is that to you?
Because if you look at that number, it's about the population of the rest of West Africa, excluding Nigeria. So that will show you how threatening, how frightening it can be, and why, if we do not address it, we cannot address the issue of insecurity in the country. Because assuming that of the economically active age, the report said about 20 million of them, of the labor force, is within the ages of 15 and 25 and 34 years of age.
Yes.
That is a very youthful age. I mean, the ages of 25 and 34, 20 million of them are in the labor market. You know what that means? That's about the size of the Ghanaian population. And if you exclude Ghana and Ivory Coast, the rest of West Africa will not be up to 20 million. So you are dealing with a volatile situation that we tend to be ignoring. When you talk of EndSARS crisis of last year, these are symptomatic of the issue, the problems we have, the underlying problems we have in the country. Where a lot of young Nigerians are not able to get jobs, and they have come out to tell the government, this is how we think this country should be run, and then we suppress them.
Johnson.
And some of them...
Johnson Chukwu, just hold a thought there. Professor Franklin Ngwu, both of you stand by. We'll have to rethink the way to create jobs in Nigeria. I want to harvest this when we come back with my panelists. Welcome back to the show. Nigeria faces an uncertain future as its population growth jumps and unemployment numbers or employment numbers crawl far behind, and the country's GDP is somewhere in between. My guests, Johnson Chukwu of Cowry Asset Management and Dr. Franklin Ngwu of the Lagos Business School. This is the final lap of our conversation around the latest job report for fourth quarter last year. Johnson, you were saying a few things around the problem with the unemployment numbers and how scary that is. I was just looking at the unemployed in terms of male and female. It looks like more male are more unemployed than female. 12.576 million for male, and female are 10.610 million naira. Million.
Yeah. Yes.
Sorry.
Okay, you want my perspective on why we have more men unemployed than women?
Yes.
Okay, basically, the Nigerian cultural environment is such that in some aspects, some segments of the Nigerian society, women are not actively encouraged to be employed or fully employed. For you to be part of the unemployed population, you must be actively looking for a job. You must be able, capable, and willing to work. So if you're not willing to work, you are not in the labor force. So the population of Nigerian females in the labor force is not at the same proportion as that of the male in the labor force, because a lot of Nigerian females are homekeepers. Some of them are full-time housewives. Some of them, their husband did not want to work, or them to work. So and that's why you have that disproportionate number of male unemployed and female unemployed. In spite of the fact that the Nigerian population, in terms of demography, is almost even. The population, the proportion of male to female population is almost even. But in terms of female in the labor force, it's not as much as those of the male, because some women choose, or as a result of cultural barriers, as a result of family pressures, choose not to work.
Okay, but we're getting to the most interesting part of this conversation, because we need to chart a way forward. So let me ask Professor Franklin Ngwu here, how do you think we can create job? What do you think the fiscal authorities can do to fix job creation in a sustainable manner beyond this fit and start approach that we've done, not just even under this administration, even if you pick it all the way back?
As you know, Bosun, is that the federal government is still in charge of so many things. So first of all is that we have to rethink from that high level and then bring it down to the lower level. So my suggestion would be, first, we need to set up a special job creating unit made up of our 10 top labor economists and other people. So, and their responsibility would be to review, rethink, and offer solutions in terms of rethinking of government policies with regards to their job creating potential and impact. If those policies are not going to create jobs, they should be properly re-examined. When you do that, then you now start looking at how do you collaborate with the private sector in terms of what policies will you use to energize or stimulate the private sector to create more jobs. So when you do all this, you find out that you liberate the economy, jobs will be created, and you look at the demand and supply, where you can actually create a demand, and you now create the supply. And once there is demand and supply, jobs will be created. So let me give you a typical example. If you want to give license for you to start up a university, so you give license to set up like 3 universities in one state or one state capital. What you're doing deliberately to create jobs with that is that we are saying that with these 3 universities, we're going to have at least 60,000 students. That 60,000 students means 60,000 rooms that will be occupied for accommodation. It means 60,000 commuters that will use transport. It means 60,000 consumers that will buy food and all that. So what you're trying to do is to create what we call associational economy. So almost every segment of the society is involved. What it means that also you have 60,000 patients that will go to hospital. And that will now liberate the health sector, the consumer goods, the real estate, the transport sector, and that is how you create a cyclic economy. And that is how you now continue in other sectors. If you look at the Postal Service, for example, it's a place where you can create over 2 million jobs without even spending so much money. You find it's supposed to be a deliberate policy of the government to say, well, we have the banks, we have the telecommunication firms, we have the schools. Please, is as a policy of the government that you must send statements of account, for example, the banks, to the owners of this account every month. You tell the telcos, please, we need you to change some of your contract to become a monthly contract, where you have to send the breakdown of this contract to the consumers every month. What you're trying to do deliberately is that you're making sure that the Postal Service
electronically or by mail.
You say?
Electronically or by mail?
By mail, physical mail. That's why I'm saying that it's supposed to be deliberate. It's a targeted...
For example, we want to reform 9 posts now. So maybe this is what we need to do. Talk to me.
Exactly. So you find out, let me give you a typical example. Some people will argue that we are now in technology world, but that's fine. But of course, you know, UK, for example, is more technologically advanced than Nigeria. But they deliver over 60 million letters every day in UK. That's what we're talking about. So how do we ensure that we achieve this? If you look at German Post as well, that is exactly what they are doing as well. So it's a deliberate effort. What it means that a bank, for example, when they send out statements of account to their customers, the impact on the bank will be very negligible. So you get from a school, you get from this, but before you know it, you collect letters that the night post will deliver on daily basis. And that way you create labor-intensive jobs, and that means that they can now transport themselves, they can now feed themselves, they can now consume, and that means that the manufacturing sector will now produce more, and that means that the schools will now have more students, and you create what as I said before, a cyclic economy. So those are, and you can do this in every sector of Nigeria. It's not about end power. Those are very interesting interventions, but they are very, very insignificant. Now, what I'm saying is that even with the level of insecurity we have in Nigeria, we can use it to create 100,000 jobs in the police force. Of course, if you look at it now, we have about 200 million Nigerians. But how many police people do we have? So why don't you create a special unit of part-time police officers, whereby if you need security, estate, banks, all those ones, they will pay 5,000 per police officer per hour. And what you are doing is that you now allow the regular police officers to really secure Nigeria. The rich ones who now want additional security can now pay for these part-time police officers. If you use 5,000, it means that if they work, they can earn money from that money that they are being paid, and they're engaged. I have also explained before that if you create three universities, you now have a shopping center. You don't use burglary proof to do that. It means that you have to clean the shopping center on daily basis. And then that means that the cleaners will work for 10 hours before they get a living wage. If they work for 10 hours, they will not commit crime again because they will be tired and they will go home. So what I'm trying to say that in every sector of Nigeria, you can clearly rethink it and see how can you create a job, how can you create jobs in those different economies, in these different sectors.
Interesting points you're making. So let me ask Johnson Chukwu about the Ministry of Labor and Productivity, whatever. Do you think this ministry can create this level of jobs? Or, let me put it this way, do you think this ministry today can lift these about 30 million or 26 million Nigerians out of unemployment?
Well, the answer is no, but it's not the job of the Ministry of Labor to create employment.
Whose work is it?
The job of the Ministry of Labor is to create an economic environment and as well as create the regulatory framework to ensure free movement of labor forces, as well as the creation of opportunities for labor to find appropriate skills to find the right employment. It's not for them to start employing. So the job of the Ministry of Labor is misunderstood. It is not their duty to create employment. It is their duty to create the economic environment with other associated ministries, Ministry of Finance, Ministry of Industries, and every other relevant ministry to create the right environment so that labor, appropriate skills will find appropriate jobs. That's the duty of labor. But let me also touch on the primary question of how do we create jobs in this economy. I think we need to start from the fundamentals. And those fundamentals, like I mentioned earlier, is to creating an economic environment where the private sector can thrive. To create that kind of environment, we need to build infrastructure. Bossy, let me tell you, Some of the greatest impediments to economic development of this country is the absence of supporting infrastructure. You do not have the appropriate road network. You don't have the rail system. You do not have power supply.
I beg to disagree. I beg to disagree, Johnson. We are building rails everywhere right now in the country. Where are the jobs?
Okay. Let me tell you, Joe Bosin. When I say you don't have the rail network, it simply means you cannot enter a train from here and go to Kano. Neither can you enter a train from Lagos here to go to Aba or to Port Harcourt. You can't do that. The standard gauge rail we're building is just going to take you from Lagos to Ibadan in the first instance. Hopefully, we can take it to Kano. But the reality is that if we rethink our approach to infrastructure development and we hand over some of this critically commercially viable infrastructure to the private sector to build, the process of building infrastructure will create immediate employment. That's the first instance. But not only that, when the infrastructure is built, it improves the ease of doing business and reduces the cost of living in the country. And then private sector operators can set up industries where they can produce here for the local market, which is a huge market, about 200 million, 220 million population, and as well as the West African market. So you can build industries here that will create employment and manufacture those things that we currently import. Because at that point, the cost of producing those things will be commensurate with what it will cost to produce them in China. So we need to address the infrastructural gap in the first instance. Let me tell you, if you remember, China just a few weeks ago celebrated that it has exited extreme poverty in a country with a population of more than 1.3 billion. They no longer have any single person that's extremely poor. What did they do? They built infrastructure and made it easy for the whole world to go to China to manufacture. Because with supporting infrastructure, you can manufacture efficiently. And with that, Nigeria used to have something as simple as of that. Remember, we used to have textile industries here. When those textile industries were operating, they had 24-hour power supply. But today, no industry in the country can boast of 6 hours of power supply, unless you are generating your own power from gas supply. We used to have rail lines that were running from Kano and other parts of the north to Lagos, to the seaports. So even if you manufacture in Kano, you can bring it to Lagos in 2 days' time. We no longer have that running. So these are some of the critical infrastructure you need to support productive activities. Without the supporting infrastructure, we would just be massaging the problem. We need to agree, how do we build infrastructure? And like I always emphasize, the government does not have the economic resources to build infrastructure from budgetary allocations. So we need to look at the private sector for infrastructural build. And that is critical if we have to reduce the level of unemployment, because if you don't have productive activity in your country, most economies with large population focus on the manufacturing sector. You must define how you want to structure this economy. We must be a productive economy because of our population. And that's the only way we can create employment for the teeming Nigerian youths.
On a final note, thank you so much, Johnson Chukwu. Professor Ngwu, when you look at these numbers, are you scared or are you worried about what the numbers will be for the year 2021 moving forward?
Of course, I am very worried. Of course, I'm not sure there's any Nigerian that is not worried, because of course we've moved. It seems that to be getting worse day by day. Almost every aspect of our economic life is getting worse. So I am very worried. But of course, I'm also very optimistic, because when I look at the potential that we have and what we can do, it clearly shows that all we need is proper rethinking and proper assessment of what we can do to achieve it. So while Mr. Chukwu has talked about the importance of infrastructure, which I totally agree, what I'm actually looking at is what can we do, even with our set of infrastructure, to even create more jobs. So he mentioned something about poverty in China, for example. In Nigeria, for you to be classified as poor, it means that you cannot earn a per capita expenditure of 137,000 naira per year. But of course, what if we say, the people at in our rural centers, please, what can you do? You can tell them, the government, state government, local government, or private sector can actually support them and say, each of you, please just plant 10 economic trees. Each of them will give you 25,000 after 3 years. It means that if you have 10,000 economic trees, you're earning 250,000 naira every year. And that means you're out of poverty. So I'm very optimistic that we can achieve a lot better, but of course it is quite disturbing.
Thank you so much, both of you, this evening, gentlemen. Professor Franklin Ngwu, Director at the Lagos Business School, and Johnson Chukwu, Policy Analyst and CEO at Cowry Asset Management. Thank you both for raising the curtain on this important data.